Okay, good afternoon, friends. I'm Joe Chuman, and we welcome you to the Puffin Cultural Forum and the third in what is an ongoing series of interviews with noted writers. This is the third in our series, and I should say a little bit about myself to begin. Yeah, I'm a leader in the New York Society for Ethical Culture. Just retired in January after 46 years serving as the leader of the Ethical Culture Society of Bergen County, right here in Teaneck, New Jersey. I also teach human rights in the graduate school at Columbia University and teach a course from time to time at Hunter College, which is part of the City University, which brings me together with our guest this afternoon. And I'd like to introduce her. Professor Barbara Katz Rothman is a professor of sociology at the City University of New York. She's won a lot of awards, including a distinguished chair in health sciences from the Fulbright Association. Professor Rothman has written, I think, about 7 or 8 books, and she has an endless list of publications in her field. Barbara is most interested in questions of maternity health, women's health, midwifery, reproductive issues, and related issues. And today's interview actually falls within that domain. She has recently published the book we're going to be discussing in a few moments. It's called The Biomedical Empire, subtitled Lessons Learned from the COVID-19 Pandemic. So it's brought right up to the moment. It's produced by Stanford University Press, and we are very privileged, and I'm very pleased to have Professor Barbara Katz Rothman as our guest this afternoon. Greetings, Barbara. Good to have you.
Lovely to be here.
Great. Okay, I've got lots of questions for you and so forth. I'm not sure we have enough time basically to go through all of them, but I want to spend a lot of time talking about definitions because you introduce a lot of concepts in your book. You're a sociologist, and many of your concepts, I think, are pivotal to the type of thesis that you're developing about the biomedical empire. Now, just to begin, the medical industry, as you all know, which you refer to as the medical industrial complex, is absolutely huge. But what do you mean specifically by the biomedical empire, and what aspects of the medical industry actually constitute an empire as you understand it?
Okay. Biomedicine is global. The medications we understand are all over the place. This is a shared body of knowledge. It's a shared global industry, or whatever one wishes to call it. I'm going beyond the industry to look at the larger system. And when you look at, just go look up what an empire is. An empire is, yes, it has an enormous economic. Empires are all about economic power. If you look at the Roman Empire or whatever, there's an economic power. There's also an element of governmental control. Empires control your behavior. You have rules you have to follow, and if you don't follow, you get in trouble. Biomedicine, we're hearing from the trans community about how their birth certificate, they want it changed because it's declaring their sex. Well, all of us have our sex declared by our birth certificate.
Right.
If you give birth, you pull the baby out of your body and you hold it there, you have no right to declare that baby born. You have to get medical, even if you birth at home, you have to, without a doctor or without a midwife, you have to get a medical definition of that baby. And that's how its citizenship begins as a human being. If you walk into, you haven't seen your grandpa in a week, you go visit, you find, he doesn't answer, you break in, get in there, you find his rotted body, rotted meat, smelly, drippy body, what was his body on the bed. Do not call the family, gather around and bury him. He is not officially dead until he is medically declared dead. So the control, you want to, whatever, you have a class, you don't want to go to it, get a note from your doctor. For the Fulbright, I had to go see a doctor to get medically approved. So our medical citizenship, and that's part of what an empire does, not what a business does. A business, an industry, doesn't make laws that govern your behavior. You don't like that business, don't go there. But you don't like the medical complex, don't get a birth certificate. It doesn't work that way. You don't exist without medical authority, so that governmentality. And empires usually have also some element that there's something larger than us here. There is something we believe in. There is the power of the emperor, the power that is almost religious and sometimes overtly religious. Well, if I had a nickel for every time I heard somebody say they do or do not believe in anything from vaccines to chemo to whatever, people believe in medicine. They have faith in it. We hear that language of faith and belief all the time. So those key elements of what an empire is, big industry, governmentality, religious belief element, bingo, that defines an empire. So that's why I decided, let's think about it that way.
Okay, very good. You talk, of course, we live in a globalized world. We think of empires as transnational. And I'm wondering what the international dimension of the biomedical empire is. How does it extend beyond American borders, which of course we're most intimately familiar with, to be a type of transnational global phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, it is transnational, there's no question. If you look at any given test, procedure, whatever, it's not like the Finns invent this test and the Germans invent that one and the Japanese invent that one. The biomedical industry, here's the test for, here's the treatment for. There are some individual variations. The biggest variation is about distribution. Mm-hmm. This is what I hear a lot. You know, I spent that Fulbright you talked about was in Finland. And a lot of Finns were telling me, oh yeah, maybe you are living under the medical industrial empire, but you know, we are not, because we share our payment. Well, of course you share your payment. If there was one chocolate factory on all the earth, all the chocolate in all of planet Earth came from one factory, and that factory sold to each country. To the US, they would sell enough for one person for everybody, and to Finland, they would sell enough for one person for everybody. Finland, everybody would get their piece of chocolate. In America, you would have people who have boxes of chocolate in the basement in the attic that they're meaning to get to, and children somewhere else who are saying, I've heard of chocolate, I'd love to try it sometime. Does the chocolate factory care? They sold to everybody. Distribution is your problem. The selling is their problem. So whether you pay individually or you pay collectively or you have private insurance or public insurance or whatever, you have whatever, a cancer of the big toe, you go to the same place, the same medical industry to get the services. How it's paid for is your problem. It's like that chocolate factory.
Okay, but let me bring this up to the minute. I wanted to talk about COVID towards the end of the talk, but I really want to seize the moment with this. Sure. You've basically explained an empire as being aligned with government, and in the book you talk about law as a way to...
I didn't say aligned with government. I said it is a governmental form.
Okay, okay, fine. Well, that doesn't necessarily detract from the question I wanted to ask. Clearly, on the international agenda at this point is the international distribution of vaccines. And the United States and the wealthy countries have come under a lot of criticism, I think justified, in the fact of hoarding those vaccines for themselves, while we have billions and billions of people in the global South, in effect, who don't have access to it. So while I have had, I'm privileged by having my booster shot and so on, and people in the United States have access to it, people in Africa, 20% or fewer have basically had their first shot. Now, if we had an international global empire, wouldn't a component of that be perhaps in a benevolent way, a enforced egalitarianism that would coerce the international community to distribute the vaccine more equitably?
Why? Which empire has been so equitable? All of the empires have
okay.
Right. People of privilege. That's not a joke. That's what it is. Empires don't say, let's conquer what we now call the global South and take their resources, give them nothing, let them die. Who cares? Let them starve, whatever. That's not our problem. But we'll have our cup of coffee or whatever, wear our cotton clothing, whatever we stole from them. We'll have it, we'll enjoy it, we'll use it. They're not our problem. That is how empires work. They do not work. Every citizen is totally equal. That is, no empire has done that.
Of course not. Right.
So the fact that it's unequal distribution doesn't say it's not an empire. It says it's just working like every other empire.
Got it. Okay. All right. You make a very critical differentiation between medicine on the one hand and health on the other. This is basic to your thesis, this type of binary. Can you explain what you mean by medicine, what you mean by health, and how they differ from each other?
A lot of people are starting to see this as an issue. I've heard people say, oh, he doesn't have any health care. And what they're saying is he doesn't have medical insurance. That industry, empire, medical care, we talk about medical services as if they were health care. Health care is care for your health. The early public health movement, there were people who had poisoned water. We need to get them clean water. The air has pollutants in it. We need to clean the air. People need outdoor space to move around. What can we do to make people healthy? They need access to food that would be healthy. That's health. You break your leg and you need it set, or you have a tumor that you need removed. The procedure of removing that tumor is not health care. It's a medical service, which may return you to health or may not. You may pick up an illness and die in the process, whatever. But those services are not health care. A lot of what was public health has actually turned into a kind of an advertising campaign for the medical complex. So, you know, I remember I had a conversation with, God, it's got to be 20 years ago. A Dutch midwife was taking a public health degree, and I was in the Netherlands, we were talking, and she was totally freaked. It was the time at which we were talking about the hole in the ozone layer and what it meant for cancers. And what the public health movement was doing was saying, apply sunscreen. And she said, yeah, how about stop making a hole in the ozone layer? But that's not a public health problem. The public health problem is apply sunscreen. And we were both, you know, that kind of laughing, crying. We're saying, had the public health movement now been there, this movement been there when that poisoned well was discovered, they would have said, buy bottled water. Don't drink water from that well, go get bottled water. So people who can afford bottled water can get it, and the other people die. And, you know, climate change is killing people. The wealthy people can keep buying their way out of it and whatever, but it's going to kill poor people. Healthcare would be fixing that. Medical services are medical services. They're not health care.
Right. So, I mean, part of your thesis, and I think central to it, is that our healthcare has basically been taken over, commandeered by the medical empire, as it were, which sort of segues, and we'll get to it at the end, as to solutions. Yeah.
Nothing about the medical industry has the power to stop the auto industry from doing pollution. Right. It's not controlling that. That's not their problem.
Right.
So it's not that they've taken it over. It's just other things that are killing you are not their problem. So yes, the food industry, the various industries, I mean, medicine industry produces a lot of pollution, but it's not, they're different arenas.
Right. Got it. Okay. Well, this gets down to nitty gritty. We all get sick. And at various times, we're all patients, okay? And I think, again, pivotal to your analysis and the aspect which, at least from the point of view of the patient, is most eye-catching, is the fate of the patient within the context of being the object of the medical empire. You refer to the patient as basically a widget in the system. And I like that metaphor because here I can be personal.
That was Timothy Snyder.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it broke up for a second. I'm listening to you.
Yeah, it did. Go ahead. I think if you sit a little bit closer to your computer, it may be a little bit.
No,
better.
it's not that. There's something breaking up in the
Okay. All right.
Timothy Snyder called the patient the widget. If you go into a hospital, you are the object being moved through the system.
Right.
And you're in this department, which does this work, and then you move to that department, which does that work. You move into the setup room for the OR, you move into the OR, you move into the post-OR, conveyor belt. Different people do different work at different points. And so that is really a very key element. A patient, I'm pulling out notes from the book, the definition of patient, and bear with me and be patient. It's kind of funny to look at it. As an adjective, it's able to accept or tolerate delays, problems, or suffering without becoming annoyed or anxious. As a noun, it refers to a person receiving or registered to receive medical treatment. Every person, every conversation with anyone receiving or registered to receive medical treatment, it seems to me, talks about delays, problems, suffering, annoyance, anxiety. So patient is a kind of a funny word. When you are actively engaged as a patient, so you're in a doctor's office, you're in a hospital, you are most confronted with your status as a citizen of the biomedical empire. You sort of are all the time, okay? So when people, adjust their glasses, wiggle their hearing aid, whatever, take a pill, you are functioning as a citizen of that empire. But when you're under their control, and some of those are what Goffman called total institutions, you're there, your food is coming from there, everything that is happening to you is from there. Like a prison or a hospital, they are total institutions, not I'll go in for an hour and pop out again. So you fully experience what it is to be the citizen of that empire. You are all the time, but you experience it intensely in patienthood. And actually, and one of the things I raised in the book, it's hard enough to be a widget in a factory, but in medical services, you aren't, your body isn't so much the widget, it's the battleground on which the battle is taking place. Medicine perceives itself in the role of fighting the illness. And you are the grounds on which that fight is taking place. Mm-hmm. And if you know something about the history of medicine, so much of it grew out of the military. I mean, literally, the development of what we call triage was out of the military. So which patient you grab first in the ER grew out of the war. The development of nursing, that, yeah, you need the doctor, but you don't need a doctor to change a bandage. Please get me somebody cheap. Women, great, super cheap, get them. So the notion that there's a hierarchy. Lots of industries, lots of institutions have hierarchies. Universities have a hierarchy. I can give my students assignments, but I can't give them orders, okay? The full professor can give the TA, the teaching assistant, things to do, but it would be offensive to say, I am ordering you, here's the order. Medicine uses the word order very overtly. Hospitals are more militarily organized than, I don't know, the Prussian army. That's their history. The patient is the battleground on which the battle is being fought. So you deal with the fact that this cancer is in this body, and yes, you'll cause 6 other illnesses and a lot of pain and whatever, but you'll win over the cancer. And many of us have experienced the problem of that the person is not engaged in the healing. They are the object on which the battle is taking place. I remember when I was a kid and I had pneumonia, the doctor explained it to me in those terms. He was, we're going to fight the battle against the pneumonia on your body. Sure. And I remember that penetrated as a kid. So yeah, it is a factory, but it is also a highly militarized system.
Well, it's almost the cliche that comes into my mind is the medical establishment and doctors who will keep people alive well beyond the point where they should be in order to basically not succumb to the forces of death. In other words, having to fight that battle to keep the person alive, when indeed it would be far more humane and caretaking if people would be permitted to expire at an appropriate time.
I mean, it's been one of the areas it's been most obvious that if you think of the way it's been set up as an industry, you can keep doing something as long as you're trying to keep the person alive. One of the things I found fascinating and creepy and whatever, when we start talking about, how about we just let them die? Or how about, even better yet, double the morphine and let them go peacefully when somebody is in active, agonizing dying, to help them do that. They call it death with dignity. Like, why is it more dignified to get an assisted suicide? There is no other circumstance we call suicide dignified, but it's dignified when it's done by a doctor. And I think what it is that this is very American, it's talked about in different ways in different countries, but specifically in America, if you are the consumer, you have a dignified role. I want this, not that. I want this service. I am the consumer. I choose what I want. And so you can make the debt dignified if you can buy it. If it becomes a commodity one can purchase, it rises in status. So yeah, and for the doctors, and I'm not saying these are evil people, but their job is to do what they know how to do, which is keep treating you. When they say, I can't anymore, there's not a thing I can do here anymore, that's when you die. And so dying is, we're done. It is not useful to medicine. It is not something where they feel like they're contributing.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can't resist the personal anecdote. I've had 7 serious surgeries, 6 of them orthopedic, all of them in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And I have to admit that the quality of the surgery I got was excellent. But I've got to tell you, the rest of my stay in that hospital basically exemplifies precisely what you were talking about. A sense of no control over what was going on, being acted upon continuously, even when I didn't want to be. Yes, I think the military metaphor is probably correct, but it's rather, in some sense, I also got a sense the countervailing notion is that it was a metaphor I would use would be a zoo, in the sense that the military hierarchy was not always that efficient, very often confused with conflicting authorities and so on and so forth, that would basically leave the patient, namely myself, bewildered as to what was coming next.
I'm sorry, that is the military, though. I mean, really,
okay. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that
zoos are actually pretty neatly run, and if the animals are distressed as the zoos, as the patients are in a hospital, we would have a lot of objections and people work with it. So the zoo doesn't work so well. Those are pretty organized.
Okay.
The military, one general says, let's attack here. The other one says there. The soldiers aren't sure which way they're supposed to go. If you look at actual military experience, you do often have conflict at the top, and the person at the bottom is just good luck with that.
Got it. Well, I guess I've got to be more fair to zoos in the future, but thanks for setting me straight. I want to read, just to pick up on our conversation, I want to just quote briefly from a paragraph from your book in order to basically push our conversation forward. It's on page 19 of your book. You say the following: thus, more and more of life is medicalized. Life's problems, joys, events, accomplishments, failures, hopes, and dreams are understood as primarily medical in nature. Body, mind, mood, sexuality, intellectual focus, sociability, whatever the concern, there is a diagnosis, a treatment, a pill for that. I am going beyond the social construction of illness and beyond medical imperialism and diagnostic imperialism to an analysis and recognition of the contemporary global world. And so biomedicine has become an imperial power in its own right, colonizing more and more spheres of life and working almost as a global religion, as well as one of the most productive economic industries on the planet. We must go beyond a sociology of or in medicine and look at the process and power in biomedical imperialism itself. That seems to be a fairly descriptive depiction of your analysis and thesis. I wonder, Barbara, if you can elaborate on that.
Sure. Let me check one that people use very often. So many of the people listening to us will have heard this one. Many years ago, people noticed that if you take 36-year-old children and line them up in size place and seat them in desks in size place and ask them to stay still for 3 hours at a time, take a half an hour break, come back, sit for 2 hours, and then go home, a lot of them can do it and some of them can't. I remember a kid in my, early class years in public school or whatever, the teachers would say, something needs to go to the, up to 2 floors to the principal. Here, give it to Joey. And you would pick whichever kid it was that was just needed to move. And anytime any chore needed movement, send them off to do it. That child now has activity disorder, and he can be medicated, so he too can sit still for hours at a time. That is one that a lot of people talk about as a medically constructed diagnostic condition, that you are not, we're not all different, but this is what you ought to be. If you're not, talk to your doctor. So a lot of childhood just became medicalized. Who you are, how you feel. Again, there's a diagnosis for that. You're too irritable, there's a diagnosis for that. You're too sad, there's a diagnosis for that. That you're emotional, intellectual, all kinds of things about the way we live our lives have become diagnostic conditions for which we can sell more drugs.
Right. Well, as a sociologist, it sort of segues into my next question. As a sociologist, you introduce the concept of social construction and apply it to illness and medicine and so forth. And I was wondering if you could just explain for our viewers what you mean by the social construction of disease. I mean, I remember graduate school reading my Berger and Luckman about social construction, but how is this applied to disease? And you also state not only that illness is socially constructed, but you even state, quote, that death, as real and physical as it is, still needs to be constructed as a social state. Now, that was an eye-opener to me because, in my own understanding of social construction, I also at the same time believe in the reality of nature, right? Which I feel makes a claim on us. And I think there are a few things more natural than death. So it was hard for me to apply the notion of social construction to the reality of death. Illness, yes, but death, I had some questions. So I was wondering if you could talk about that. Yeah.
Let me talk very specifically. There was a long time ago a book called Passing On by David Sudnow. And he talked about how people were or weren't revived from what appeared to be death, depending upon their social status. So whatever, 5-year-old white kid that electrocutes himself in his house, falls down dead. There's no heartbeat, there's nothing. They try to bring him back. A drunk guy is found on the streets, he stinks about being dead on arrival. I'm always simplifying, but that something about one's status implies how much work we put into saving it. If you're walking down the street with a friend, you call whoever, they work on him for 20 minutes or whatever, he is dead. You'll say, I was with John when he died. You are with John, the exact identical thing happens. There is no heartbeat, there is no nothing. He is then resuscitated, and you never say, I was with John when he died. I was with John when he almost died. You're only dead if you stay dead. So the exact same physiological status is only declared retroactively. And that's just a good example that it still needs to be declared socially and understood. And that issue of legally declared, again, you walk in and you find you're rotted, the body is rotted. It's illegal to bury them. You will be in more trouble than you can imagine if your family comes together and they dig a hole in the backyard and they bury grandpa. Oh my God. Mm-hmm. So death needs to be constructed legally by a medically approved person. And some of it, well, whatever, within medicine, who's allowed and who's not to, and how they can do it under what circumstances. But the notion that death itself, which is as real as it's going to get, is still a socially constructed state. Right. Things aren't real or socially constructed, okay? Mm-hmm. A real thing, what does it mean? It means what we understand it to mean socially.
Mhm. Okay, very good. The status of doctors. Doctors have usually walked among us as gods, but your analysis of the empire indicates that they've been severely demoted, and a lot of their authority has been transposed to management. Can you talk about that and what doctors are undergoing? And I know there are doctors now who will advise their children not to go into the medical field. It's not what it used to be, in part because the doctor
My
doesn't
guess
feel
is you've
that he
all
or she has the
experienced
same
this.
control. Yeah. Oops.
Yeah, doctors are very unhappy about the state of do not. Are we having internet issues again?
Yes, we
dear.
are. Yeah,
I
quite
don't know
severe.
if it's
Quite
that.
severe
Are
at
we?
the
Can we
moment.
now?
Yep. Yes,
Okay.
yeah, you're frozen at the moment. Right.
Uh, sorry.
Well,
So
Andrew,
Can you hear me though?
I'm sorry, I'm just going to step in for a second. So Barbara, your video is just not working at all. Can you shut off your video function and then so that we can at least hear you without you cutting off?
Can you now hear me? Can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you. Andrew?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, okay, we may have
Fine.
to do it that way.
So
We also got an
we'll do it that
opportunity
way
to,
for a while.
yeah, you also have an opportunity to see your cat, which is very nice.
We'll do that for a few minutes and then we'll try it out.
Yeah, we'll
again.
see. Yeah, if we can come back again. Yeah. Okay, I guess
Yeah,
there's just so
so-
much bandwidth. Yeah, go ahead. We were talking about doctors and their
Doctors
changed status.
themselves are talking a lot about the loss of professional status, the loss of individual decision-making, of professional status, of having to, a lot of doctors are not recommending that other people go into medicine. They're starting to feel like, just don't, it's not worth it anymore. It is something that is definitely troubling to a lot of physicians. We see the same thing in the universities. Professors used to have more power. Now, how about we just tape your lectures and play them for the students? There's been a case of somebody who died and they were still playing his lectures for the students. The university owned them. They don't need the professor, they need the tapes. So in a lot of places, as the administrative power grows larger, the individual professionals lose power. And that is something that has happened in medicine, that the ability of an individual doctor now to open up a private practice and see patients themselves, it's getting harder and harder to do that. You are part of a system and the system has its rules. So maybe if it were you, you'd rather do this, but I am required to do that. And that's part of the industrialization element to this and the loss of control at the bottom.
Well, that includes the insurance companies too, doesn't it, as part of the imperial power?
I'm going to try the video again. It includes whoever's paying. So in the US, it's insurance companies and the government and different odd mixes. In most of the world, it is just the government. But yes, the government too is if the larger biomedical industry says X, pill X is the appropriate treatment for condition Y, then all of the prescribers are required to prescribe pill X for condition Y, even if it's not in their own personal best professional in judgment. That's what's required. And you're hearing more of that from physicians, that if it were up to me, maybe we'd wait another bit, but I don't really have the control to do that.
Yeah, I've experienced this, and I think we all have, is you come into the doctor's office, you proclaim a symptom, and it triggers automatically 8 steps in a protocol. And you have a feeling that that mandate is not directly tagged to your illness, but there are extrinsic forces that are requiring that the doctor go through that protocol, maybe set up by the insurance company, maybe the fear of lawsuits or whatever, something extrinsic to your medical condition and treatment in that regard is, I mean, that seems to fall into the paradigm of the all-powerful
it's a
empire.
larger system.
Right.
It's a larger system. If you look at the individual who was sent to take over a particular community in India, that England sent over to take over a particular community in India, They had an enormous amount of power over those people in India, but they couldn't do what they wanted to do with them. They had to make them do what the higher powers in the empire made them do.
Mm-hmm.
So vis-a-vis the people below you, you have power, but they're not kings, they're not royalty, they're not rulers. They are administrators for somebody else's higher decision rule.
Right. You know, I got to say, again, given my own experience, when I moved to Bergen County in the 1970s, my physician was a lone practitioner whom you saw in his home. He then went on to become the focus of a group of physicians that moved to a modern office, and the group grew larger and larger. And the last step, just a year or two ago, was taken over by Englewood Hospital, which meant that the billing agent was somewhere in New England or whatever the case. And the feel you got, Barbara, was of an entity becoming increasingly corporatized. I mean, one of the liabilities I always experienced is I never had more than 8 minutes with my doctor. It felt like an assembly line treatment. He was a very good diagnostician, so I kept with him, but it was sort of an assembly line treatment. And the last sort of indignity was that the practice, which is now very large, was taken over by the local hospital. And as a result, I can't even reach these people on the phone. I mean, I'm put on hold for endless amounts of time, which is not what you want when you call your doctor and you've got a medical issue, So one senses right before our eyes the increased corporatization of medical care,
Yeah, there's no question. I think we're all seeing it.
Right.
And all I did in this book was tell you what you're all seeing, a kind of obvious thing that we are looking at larger administrative powers, rulers, making judgments and decisions for people who are not independent rulers.
Right. Yeah, I want to get back to something you touched on, and it interests me particularly because my field, my doctoral work was in the study of religion, and you refer to an aspect of the empire as becoming, in effect, a religion. You say the state religion of the postmodern, post-industrialized state. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the religious dimension of the biomedical empire.
This feeling of belief that people have, of
Mm-hmm.
trust and belief, is a piece of it. If you look just at the pragmatics of it, we used to, many cultures used to call in a priest of some sort, a religious ruler, to transition from life to death at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So they did the final blessing. So many religions have versions of this, because in truth, when someone dies, it's really horrific for the people who love them. Many times people who are losing somebody haven't done this 50 times. This could be the first serious grief they've ever had, or the
Right.
third. And how to manage this, what to do. So it used to be religious people would come in, let us pray, let me comfort you with prayer, let's deal together. We will declare him dead, we will bury him. The doc comes in and does that now. I was talking about this many years ago, actually, in a class, and I was talking to, there was a student in the class, it was a doctoral seminar, and I was talking about how when people are getting home hospice,
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very commonly, we're here because, Aunt Susie is dying. We're gathered around the bed, and Susie goes, and someone says, "Oh my God," and dials 911, and they bring an ambulance in. And we're here for her to die, but the sight of the dying freaks people, and they call for medical help.
Sure.
And this woman said that her mother was a nurse, and she'd been doing administrative work for 30 years, not bedside nursing. But she told people, call me right away. And so she could come, she put a stethoscope around her neck and sit in the room. And it was basically like, come in the religious robe and wear the cross around her neck. She would come dressed like a nurse, which she didn't need to be for any of her work, but she'd come in costume and help people make that transition in a way that was blessed and appropriate. And that is one simple example of what I mean. That the authority for things that are bigger than you, that are overwhelming, has in many ways moved to religion, to medicine as the religious arbiter.
Right. Well, you know, that segues into another question, and this did really raise a question in my mind when I read it. Obviously, we're in an exceedingly critical moment with regard to abortion rights. I mean, everyone knows that, and I'm a pessimist here. I think that Roe v. Wade is going to be gone. It's already functionally gone in parts of the country, but I think that it'll be overturned, and the federally guaranteed right to an abortion will be eliminated, which I think is part of the whole misogynistic tendency in our culture, which is very dark, I think. But a point you make, and I guess I want to question this a bit, push back a little bit. You state that the quote, biomedicine has replaced religion at the gates of life, determining who or what a person is. And so the question is, has it really? I mean, when I look at the abortion debate, there's no doubt that science and medicine can in very detailed ways chart the development of the fetus from the point of conception to birth on its, on its gestational journey. But it seems to me that the debate about abortion, which of course is many faceted, you can look at it from many different directions, is basically controlled still by the religions. That it is the Catholic Church and conservative evangelicals who have determined, without biblical reference, have determined that conception is when life begins. And that still seems to me the controlling agency in that debate, and not medicine. Medicine tells us how the fetus develops, but it cannot tell us when humanity enters into that picture, which of course is central to one line of argument in the debate over abortion.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and there's, I'm not arguing that the church is opposed to abortion, but when Roe v. Wade was established, it said it's a decision between a woman and her doctor. So if I think I need an abortion and the doctor doesn't, I don't need an abortion. You tell that to a pregnant woman. So it was medicalized absolutely intensely from the beginning. Before there were doctors, prehistory, people knew how to end pregnancies. This is not that flippin' complicated. So people have always known how to end pregnancies. The ability to do that became practicing medicine without a license. They put those people out. They made it illegal, which made it more dangerous. And we thought abortion was incredibly dangerous because all the safe illegal abortions did not go tell their doctor they just had an abortion. Anyone that went wrong got sent to the hospital. So medicine developed this notion that abortion is so dangerous and only a doctor can do it. And all the people who perfectly well knew how to do abortions were made illegal. The notion that pregnancy is a condition of the woman, many cultures understand it that way. And what a lot of people want is to be unpregnant. They want to move out of the pregnant status. Mm-hmm. The notion that from the beginning, there's what doctors understand, the fetal patient, the embryonic and then fetal patient, trapped behind what I swear to God, they have literally called the maternal barrier. So the woman's body is the barrier to access to the fetal patient. That image has come into the world. The notion that you need to do ultrasounds and see it, they will literally ask a woman to turn away from herself, look at a screen on the other side, and bond with the baby. It is part of her body. Birth isn't about bonding, it's about separating. If you look at what's happening, you're not taking two things and putting them together. You're taking one thing and pulling it apart. And the woman is pushing out a part of her body, which becomes independent. Medicine took the Western patriarchal notion that daddy plants a seed in mommy, that the baby is essentially the seed. They used to, the early medicine drew the homunculus. They looked at the head of the sperm under a microscope and saw the little baby curled up in there. Right. They eventually had to go, oh, damn, women have seeds too. Okay, babies are half his and half hers. Oh, women have more than half because we also have the nucleus, the piece that surrounds the nucleus. So we don't only contribute the nuclear DNA. Women also contribute other DNA and the pregnancy. But it's half his, half hers, might as well have grown in the backyard. That's the medical definition of pregnancy, and that has become the cultural and social definition. remember back when I was an undergraduate, I did a course in children's literature, God knows why, but I took a course in children's literature because it was 2 credits and at a convenient time. And one of the things we read was a book by Margaret Mead for children on where babies come from. And this little kid says to mommy, where was I before? And the mommy says, you were always in me. Not you were in daddy, you planted the seed. You were always in me. But before you, I was in grandma and you were in me. Mead had spent a lot of time in other cultures. I might actually, I just think it's Pearl Buck. Why did I say Margaret Mead? There was another book by, okay, sorry, Pearl Buck had spent a lot of time in China with other cultures that had other ways of understanding the nature of birth. The medical version is this, the fetus is externally constructed and implanted. But, and then, yes, so then the religious gives you the argument or whatever. But it was the medical redefinition, social construction of pregnancy as a separate being planted inside the woman's body. That's the logic they're using, and that was created by medicine, by biomedicine,
Okay.
early on.
Yes, I understand from that perspective. Okay, I think we can't talk about this as you, in effect you do, without talking about the implications for race, class, and gender with regard to the deployment of the biomedical empire and what it does. Can you talk a little bit about that? There's a lot to say, I know. But
There's a lot to say. I'm trying to be like, some of the gender stuff I just raised, that coming out of a classically patriarchal, and I really mean patriarchal, rule of men as fathers. Men rule all over the world, but they might rule as the mother's brother, that child that the mother bears, his niece or nephew. He chooses what happens to it because they share a matrilineal descent. That's very common in the world. The patriarchal is God the Father plants the seed. And that shapes so much of what we see, that it ignores the lived experience of women and women's bodies as producing. And you can have trans people, but you have to start off with what we've traditionally defined as a woman's body to be able to produce a baby. And we have defined the only meaningful relationship is the genetic. And, you know, the most famous image of a mother with an adult child is the Pietà, Mary holding the dying or dead Jesus in her arms. She had no genetic relationship to him. She wasn't really related to him. She was a surrogate. But the lived experience, by our definitions now, she was.
I guess.
But so that's a good example of the gender issues, that
Right.
women are not particularly important in the medical model,
Right.
of issues of procreation, baby making. The race issues, I guess, go back to what you said early on about who's getting the vaccines. That's about the form that the empire takes in different places, is who's paying for it. A lot of our early work in sanitation was done because in poor people's neighborhoods, in cities, rich people had to walk past the poor person's neighborhood. That image of, you know, the fancy handkerchiefs men had was to hold it against their nose when they had to walk through a poor neighborhood. So, you know what, let's give them bathrooms, garbage pails, because I don't want to get their diseases. When COVID came, that actually poor people got vaccinated. Well, that's because rich people didn't want to catch COVID from them. In my neighborhood, they're about to kill 1,000 trees on the Lower East Side. Leave the FDR, the drive, in perfect condition so it won't interrupt traffic. But 1,000 trees will be killed, a park will be destroyed. All of the housing along that is public housing, or most of the housing along it is public housing. Those children have really high rates of asthma, that will go up. Rates of heart disease, of lung disease, all of that will go up, but it's not particularly important. But damn it, vaccinate all of them, because one of them might be delivering their groceries to my door. They might be the person who's waiting on it. They might be the person folding my laundry. Right. So the distribution is the same as distribution of anything. It doesn't make it not an industry because it's distributed differently in different places, and it doesn't make it not an empire because of that.
Right. Yeah, no, I want to, that certainly perfectly moves into the next question, which you've already basically commented on. Your book, of course, again, talks about lessons learned from COVID-19. And part of your thesis is that COVID-19 has at least partially unmasked the inequities of the biomedical empire. I was wondering if you can, Barbara, elaborate on that. How has COVID basically exposed the realities that concern you in your thesis?
Well, let me start with some simple ones, just the simple, easy ones. People who you love with all of your heart, who love you, who are totally connected to you, those people are in medicine called the visitors. They're allowed set periods to come in and visit you. The person who changes the bag on your IV or on your catheter is the caregiver. So the person who comes through, whether they chat with you or not, that's the caregiver. And the other one is the visitor. In the real world, the caregivers are the people who know what would make you feel comfortable, who are taking care of you. And that is an enormous part of the process of dying or recovering. Somebody who knows what you like. And, you know, some people like to be touched in some way, some people don't. Some people, I remember one time years ago when my son was sick and somebody gave him ice, and that works for him to just put ice against him. If you ever did that to me, I dropped dead on the spot. But we knew, the person with me knew that a cold would make him feel better. A caregiver has a cold for this and hot for that, but not who are you, what do you like? So that became very obvious in COVID when they said, okay, the important thing now, we're going to lock her in there. She's dying, that will provide all the right services, but she will be alone. Nobody who cares about her will be with her. If she can concentrate on an iPhone screen, maybe she can see you. Well, they showed us how beautifully they were tending to people by holding up a screen so that your dying grandmother could maybe see the face of her daughter on the screen. What's essential and important were the services that medicine wanted. What's essential and important in human life, we're not part of those services, so the hell with them. So a lot of us experienced that you were hanging out of a window to say goodbye to grandma, or your wife, or your husband, or your child. So what was essential and what was not was made very clear to people who maybe didn't see it so much pre-COVID, but COVID made it dramatic. That's one example.
Right. Okay. In the last few questions I have, I want to look at alternatives. It seems to me that the biomedical empire, like so much else in our world, is really engined by the capitalist system and by the profit motive. I mean, to get beyond what you're talking about, does it require, I mean, you don't get into a type of economic analysis or political analysis in this regard, but do you really feel that that we can remediate the types of issues you're talking about without dismantling, in effect, the capital system?
I am doing an economic analysis. I am saying it is an economic power.
Yes, you are. That's true.
Fight an economic power with anything but economic power.
Okay.
And so if you want to dismantle this, you're going to have to fight it economically. And that's different than how you distribute the services. Again, we're back to the chocolate factory. Distributing the services is one thing, but what if we said, we talk about people's right to health care or whatever, by which you mean they have a right to get a medical procedure done on them. And most countries, most of the developed world does believe that people who, whatever, have a growth or a cut or a running, whatever, have a right to have medical services to take care of that. I think it is interesting, speaking about race, the only other country in the developed world that did not have a nationally covered system where, as a citizen, you have a right to medical services was South Africa. They ended apartheid and brought in national insurance. Think about that, America. We have the notion that I don't want to cover their bills, and so private insurance makes sense here. In a very divided, the disunited states, private insurance makes sense. We don't need to pay my taxes for their bills.
Right.
So yeah, we are looking at an economic power
Sure.
and economic distribution.
Right.
If I said every person in suffering, in pain, dying, has a right to have people who care about them with them, or every person who has somebody who is dying has a right to be with them, then you have to have sick leave or whatever the hell for that. In our world, in this country, much of the world does do that. But in this country, yeah, I'm really sorry your mother's dying, but you have to be here by 9. We'll give you a day off for the funeral or whatever, but you can't quit work to take care of your mother for 3 months. That's ridiculous. So what we value and what we don't value is made pretty clear. If we had some social changes that said, in truth, if somebody's mother is dying, they're entitled to family leave. And that could, in fact, because death is kind of tricky to predict and organize, it might be months of family leave. And they could still get a guaranteed income and everything. The kids would have food on the table, everything. And you could take care of grandma or your mother or whoever. That would be a challenge. What we have is, well, you don't get any time off, but you can put her in a nursing home and we'll let you in to see her if there's no COVID active. We'll let you in to see her for a few hours a day or a week. That makes money for that industry, and they're happy with that.
Yeah. Okay. As I move towards a close, I really would like to sort of brainstorm this. You talk about, again, medicine on the one hand and health on the other. If we were to move away from the medical empire, dismantle it, what would the alternatives actually look like? Here I am, I'm sick. Okay. What would the alternatives look like for me if
I'm not talking about stopping medical services when medical services are appropriate.
Right.
I was in the ER a few days
Right.
ago. My jaw dislocated. I live
Sure.
alone. I need somebody to put it back in again.
Right.
We should have those services.
Correct.
Okay, that's different.
Right.
Then we should see if we can then get you on 7 expensive medications to manage blah, 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 and have you come in for repeated tests that we know you're more likely to die of the medicine is dangerous the way we're practicing it. It really is. Medical error is like the leading cause of death. And that's just error. That's not a known side effect of this drug, is that it could kill you. But if you died of the drug, you died. We say you died of the disease, and we're sorry, and it was inevitable. But people die of the drug, not the disease. That happens in the world. If there was no economic incentive, we might think very differently about what medical procedures we do and when and on whom. So if you took away the medical incentive, not the way each country does, where we'll share the pay, but if the world went, the whole world suddenly, unimaginably, and it ain't happening, went communist or something, so profit was no longer a motive on planet Earth, I think medicine would look really different really fast. Would you be doing screening for things that are not, you remember when they brought in prostate cancer screening? All old men have prostate cancer. When you do autopsies on 90-year-old healthy men who died of something else, who were healthy their whole lives, got hit by a truck at 90, they usually have some prostate cancer. If you screen everybody, you can find it and you can start treating it, and people will die of the treatment sometimes or whatever. It was fabulous. They really pushed prostate cancer screening. Some countries went, oh, hold the phone, and stopped it. Some didn't. But nobody would have done that without an economic incentive. So if we took away economic incentive, I think what we would hospitalize people for, when, the economic incentive is, the doctors make so much money. The home health aid is paid crap. The work you need from the home health aid is nothing. We brought up zoo zookeeper attendants get paid better than early childhood or home health care workers. So if you're taking care of an expensive, orangutan in the zoo, you get paid well. You're taking care of somebody's kid or sick grandmother, you get paid crap. If you took out the economic incentive, I think that might look very different.
Right. So we would move again more towards a more immediate care model that was patient-based, basically to some degree patient-directed, was more responsive to the needs of the patient, and so
forth. People around the patient.
And
it would be more social and community.
Right.
The editor-in-chief of the Lancet, of all places, like a leading medical journal in the world, read this book, which shocked me, and made a basically a book review as an op-ed, and said that I end with a plea to bring the care back in, and that he said we, the citizens of the biomedical empire, the physicians and such, need to hear that. We need to heed that plea, that we have constructed a system that is just as hard for the doctors and the nurses. I mean, if you talk to people who really are day in and day out for years suffering from the cruelty of medicine, the patients suffer for a few months maybe, but the nurse who repeatedly has to be cruel to people because of the way the system demands, has to make a crying person leave their crying person. You can't stay with them, visiting hours are over. They hate that. It's faster if we just put catheters in all these men. It's faster. Well, it's really painful, but you can change all the urine bags at 2 o'clock and just run down the hall, change all the bags. Whereas if you asked each man to ring a bell and get help to pee when he needed to pee, it takes more nursing care. So I've watched or heard a screaming man being held down while the catheter is put in, because it's faster and more efficient for the system. That's not kind to the nurses, that's not kind to the patients. So putting the care back in would require a major disruption to the profit motive.
Right. Well, you're fortunate you've been spared that experience. Right.
No,
Right.
No, catheters are painful and everybody.
Yes, right. Yeah.
But anyway, but doing it for efficiency, not because we have a bladder
No,
problem.
yes, I understand the point.
And nobody would do that other than the monetary motive. Okay,
Right.
if we just hired some more nurses, we wouldn't have to do that. That would be expensive.
Yeah, it's a whole other conversation, but I'm curious as to how the editor of the Lancet, who was so good to publish a review of your book, evaluates the medical system in Britain with regard to the parameters that you're discussing.
He was saying the same thing, because I'm only talking in the US, we distribute it differently, but it's the same system. And he was saying we need to put the care back in.
Right.
That the system is organized for profit economically
and
at the top.
I think that's really the central idea, the foundation of your basic thesis and critique.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a marvelous conversation. I think a very important one. We probably do. There is one question from the audience, I see, but I have one final brief question from you. Given COVID, given the at least partial exposure and unmasking of the inequities that you're talking about, are you hopeful about the future?
No.
Well,
no, partly this is me.
Okay.
My brother said to me once, Barbara, the glass half full thing. And I said, Jeff, it's a glass. It's going to fall off the table and break anyway. What difference does it make if it's half full or half empty? So no, I'm not an optimistic person. I also think that to make the kind of change I'm talking about, and the audience question is, how can individuals resist the empire?
Okay.
Individuals can't really. You can in your own personal life if you have the wherewithal. You cannot institutionalize someone. You can keep people at home when they die, but it requires money. It requires a kind of occupation that permits you to take time off. You can individually try and resist. You can try and bring bits of kindness into institutions. There are things individuals can do, but you can't resist a large imperial force by individual, I'm going to be nicer stuff. And I don't know how to make the revolution. I don't know how to end advanced post-industrial capitalism in which everything, including who's going to die of COVID, is determined by who's serving our economic interests. Mm-hmm. In that world, individuals are not resisting that empire. We need a major, deep kind of revolutionary change in our world. And I'm not hopeful. But I wish good luck to young people to maybe make that world revolution and construct a world that is not entirely about profit.
Right. There you go. That's a good point. Good place to end, I think. Barbara Katz Rothman, I really do want to thank you so very, very much
Thank you.
for this really fascinating conversation. Sorry we had some problems at the beginning technically, but
Yes.
those improved towards the end. And I think the conversation was really very worthwhile. And I do wish you, Andrew, we have no more questions. Am I correct? We're at the end from Puffin. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so very, very much.
Thank
Wish
you
you well,
so
and
much.
we'll personally be in touch, I'm sure.
Yep.
Take care.